Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club. Apologies for the ragged voice, but it's that time of year when my voice goes out. At this point, we are in our second major step of construction, and it is time to put the fins on. Now, the fins, actually, we've got kind of two sets of fins, and of course, we have a template here that we put onto the tube and trace it, and then use the old door jam technique. But you've seen that before, so there's nothing new with that. Get rid of that. What is a little bit different is we have two sets of fins here. We have these kind of long strakes that go like this, and then we have the fins that fit on the single lines, right? So the wide, long ones are going to go in these double lines that have been drawn. And a couple of things. One is that although the fins they look almost like they're math teacher talking, isosceles trapezoids. They're not quite. They are ever so slightly longer on one face than the other. And when I put them together, it's kind of obvious when you have them all stacked like this, but I had them kind of mismatched. So do make sure that you have them all pointing the right direction. Worst case scenario, if you can't tell, and you really should be able to tell, but if you can't, the grain of the wood runs toward the front. That's how Estes and pretty much all rocket manufacturers, and hopefully you too someday when you make your own designs, will orient the wood. And there's a good reason for that. If the wood happens to be parallel to the direction the rocket's going to fly, that's its weakest orientation. And you could end up cracking the fin in half, which would be bad and something to be avoided. So, in any event, it is time to start gluing. One nice thing about this is that we have this tool. It is a little bit of balsa, it's a jig. What is eventually going to happen is you're going to put it on here. The long straight part goes right in the groove that's been cut, and the two fins, the big fins, should be able to. The edges of them will be up against the edge of the jig, so that's going to help us with alignment. Notice that I have shaped these fins. They are sanded and arrow. Well, not fully arrow fin, but they're not. They're good. I mean, they're rounded, but they're not perfect, and that's okay. Anyway, the instructions call for us to put the big fins on first. I'm not entirely sure I want to do that because honestly, I find it easier to get these on straight than these. And since this has a groove in it, we can use the straight to line things up for the fin itself. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put the long ones on first. So I'm going to kind of throw caution to the wind with the instructions. Um, and that's okay. We can live with that. So it's glue time. Um, I have removed the burrs mostly, but I'm probably going to have to do a little sanding after things are attached. Um, just because that's how the sanding turned out with these. So in any event, usual gluing techniques here. So I'm just putting a thin coat on almost to the end. There we go. I've got my dowel. I'm going to spread the glue thin. And then even though this is not really a major, it's not like a load bearing, it's not going to take a lot of abuse, I'm still going to put the 2 layers of glue on just because. So we'll wait 30 seconds or so. These actually I find very easy to attach because they're so long, it's pretty easy to get them on straight. It is more difficult to put a short fin on because you have less well, they're straight to begin with. So the longer the line is, the easier it is to get them straight. And since we've got these kind of double markers where they're supposed to go in, this should be really accurate. Anyway, that's been long enough, I guess. And now I'm going to add a very thin second layer, very thin second layer. Really don't need a whole lot. And we're probably going to get a lot of glue smearing out the side when we do this anyway. So spreading it out, especially down here as a bit of a blob. That looks good. Let's get these out of the way. I'm going to kind of roll it on. This thing is supposed to be exactly as long as the whole body tube. So that should be pretty easy. I don't need to worry about getting it in the right place, and I'm just slowly going to push it down, and that looks pretty good. looking straight down, you could probably see it better than I am, so I'm going to roll it back toward myself just briefly to make sure that it is aligned both with the end of the body tube and as close as they can be, at least as close as I can see to the marks that I put on there. Now, one of the problems with putting a long strake on is that you can kind of hold the ends down, and that's fine, but you want to make sure that you've got the middle properly attached as well. So I'm kind of, I pushed to make sure that it was seated pretty well in most places. Now, I do have a little bit of glue seeping out the side. I'm going to clean this up right now to make sure that I don't have any blobs that are going to be leaking out later. Because once the glue dries, that's it. That's as good as it's going to get. I don't want to have to try to, I'm going to put a fillet on these probably. They're actually pretty small, so maybe not. But, what I'm doing right now is essentially making a very small fillet. All right. So I'm off by a little bit down here, and I'm looking down the tube just to make sure. I'm going to check the other end as well. And that's off by a little bit as well, but not very much. And it looks like this is actually a little bit longer than the tube. That's kind of an interesting thing to have happen. If that is actually the case, once everything's all set and dry, I'm just going to sand the end so that both ends, I guess, depending on which one's over too long, to make sure that it sets properly. Now, I am going to attach the other 4 strakes. You do not need to watch that. It's the same basic technique. This jig doesn't really do a whole lot yet, but if you'll notice, it fits over nicely, and that's going to show me, and I can look at it now, I guess, to see that it is essentially in between the 2 lines. It is. I really don't want to glue that in place, though. So there we go. I'm going to let this dry for a little bit, and actually, no, I'm going to put the other ones on. Then I'm going to let it dry for a little bit, and then I will be back to put the fins on. So I will see you in a few minutes. All right, so I've got all the strakes attached now. So one thing you can do to make sure they're on right is to look down the barrel at them and make sure that all the strakes appear to be in a straight line, because the wood, the balsa here, is flexible enough that it could bow without breaking or anything, but it could just make an arc shape instead of a nice straight line. So I did look down them. One of them's a little deformed, and I'm checking again here. This one on the top is a little bit off, but it's not far off, and it's okay. The other thing you could do is the tool here should fit in the gap here all the way down to the tube itself, and you can check that in multiple places like so. And you should do that for each one as well to make sure that it's uniform, the distance between all of them. It seems to be pretty good. Now it's time to attach the fins. I want to be extra sure here that I'm doing a good job attaching these things. So we're definitely going to use the 2 applications of glue technique here. And, the strake, the worst thing that can happen to that really is it's not on quite straight, and you adjust it after the fact and as you look down it. The fins, of course, as you apply them, they could certainly fall off, and that's really irritating. So we're going to make sure that we're going to try our best to make sure that doesn't happen. In any event, so we're going to let the glue get a little tackier than I normally would, just to make sure things are being applied just right. This one, the fins go exactly at the end of the tube, of the body tube. There isn't really a preferred front or end of the tube itself at this point, but the thicker end of the strafe is the end. So it's going to end up like this. And again, the grain is pointing up. It's going to be like that. All right. Time for the second application of glue on this one. There we go. Spread it out. There we go. And now time to apply. Again, since it's at the end, I can just kind of like roll it on. I'm going to try to get it, since the fin is not it's thicker than the line. I'm going to try to get centered on the line before I really push it up the whole way. All right, I'm going to hold it in place, or at least try to, there we go, for a few seconds to get things more or less set up before I try to adjust it for accuracy here. because it should be pretty good. I mean, I'm not wildly off, I would assume at this point. I mean, maybe you can see better than I can. I need to move it eventually to make that determination, but I want the glue to be fairly well set before I start messing around with it. I'm also going to clean up my seam here because I got a little bit of a glue mess, and I've adjusted the fin in the process. So all the more reason to worry about that kind of thing before you try to set where the fin's going to be. All right. Looking down the barrel, you can see it is, I don't know, pretty good, at least at this point. It's kind of hard to tell without the other fins attached. But what I can do at least is make sure that it's centered properly with relation to the strafes. And there is a little bit of a gap here, as you can see looking down this way. So that's either the strafe isn't quite lined up or the fin line that I chose isn't quite right. And it does look like the fin could stand to move this way toward the jig a little bit. So I'm going to just push it with the tip of my fingernail, kind of adjust it in that direction. Yeah, probably could stand a little bit more. I'm just ever so slightly nudging it. And I really don't want to leave that jig on very long either because there's still some wet glue in quite a few places actually, notably around the strafe. I really don't want it to get stuck there. All right, that looks passable for the time being. I'm going to apply another fin now. I'm going to do two of them, at least on camera, so you can see how to use the jig properly for final alignment. Also, you'll notice that the last couple videos anyway I've been filming, I've been using this cutting pad. It's well, it's Chinese. It's a ripoff of probably a really decent one you could get, but this was fairly inexpensive. It's supposedly regenerative, so if you cut on it, it's supposed to like heal the cuts. I don't really know how that's supposed to work. There are nicks in it and things, but it's not like cutting on wood that's never going to get better. I mean, by and large, it still looks pretty nice. Most of my cuts are kind of down here, and they don't look bad, frankly. I like this for if no other reason than it has a grid line on it, and since we're applying a four-finned rocket, the grid lines are all at 90-degree angles, so I can use them to help out with final alignment as well. There's also this part right here that has some angle marks on it, which is nice too, but harder to use since part of it goes, you can't see this, but like this part right here, the edge of the mat is just off camera, so not as useful. All right, applying the second fin, making sure that I have the grains facing the right direction, centering it on the line, and then I'm going to roll it forward just like the last time. And that looks reasonably good for the time being. Again, I'm going to hold it in place, pushing down fairly hard to make sure the glue starts to set before I start futzing around with it too much, cleaning up the extra glue. You can see it's kind of leaking there, and this is still pretty wobbly as I move it to show you that. So letting the glue set up a little bit, that's probably pretty good now. I'm going to carefully clean up the seam here a little bit on both sides. All right, now time for the jig. If we did this right, the groove in the cut in the jig should fit right over the strafe, and it should go down right between the two fins, and there should be not much space at all. So far, looking at it, this fin needs to be adjusted up a bit, and you can have a look yourself. I'm going to stand up and have a look too. Overall, I'd say it looks pretty good. I'm going to use my grid lines to help a little bit as well. It looks like this one could stand to be adjusted toward the jig a bit, but overall, it looks pretty good. Oops, I adjusted that one a little bit as well. I didn't mean to do that. All right, that looks like a pretty nice 90-degree angle. So I'm going to attach the other four fins off camera. The only other thing I'm going to do in this video, in fact, we could do it now. I won't do it. I will do it momentarily. Is I'm going to attach the launch lug as well. This is all kind of the same skill, so we'll do that in this section as well. So I will see you in a minute or so to do that as well. All right, so the fins are all attached now, and they are fairly well straight. I checked them all using the jig here like this, as it's intended to go in between them, and they look about as good as I can reasonably expect. So the last thing I need to do is, remember, we built this standoff part for the launch lug, so we need to apply that. Since this isn't directly attached to the body, I'm actually going to use usual gluing techniques for this, um, because there could be a decent amount of force put on the launch lug now that it's not right up next to right next to the body of the tube. So we'll do the usual business and let the glue dry here, or we start to set before we attach it. Overall, I'd say this went pretty well. It is really nice to have a piece like this around. I usually keep at least some of them because this is a fairly standard body size. And I think the next rocket that I'm going to build, I believe, uses the same body tube size and 4 fins. So this will be fairly handy to have. The other thing that I need to do, and I will do off camera because you've seen it before probably at this point, is the fins need fillets. So I will run a bead of glue next to them. It is going to be a little bit trickier because of the strake to get my finger in there properly. And I don't think I'm going to be able to get a good fillet around the strakes themselves, although I suppose I could try. That shouldn't be too hard. I'm sure it's doable. Anyway, at least not in here anyway. That part, because the launch lug is going to go right here, I'm not going to be able to get a fillet. And that's okay. So this goes approximately here. We will adjust as necessary. We don't really need to worry about orientation a whole lot, just so long as it is mostly up. And this is actually too small for me to get my finger in there as it is. So I'm going to use my dowel to kind of spread out the excess glue and essentially kind of mop it up as well, because I prefer not to have just a glue mess in there if I can help it. This side, at least, I can use my finger to smooth. Checking for alignment, I'm going to look at it down the barrel just to make sure that it is in line with the line, among other things. And it looks reasonably good. Just having a look down, it actually could use a little adjustment now that I look at it. So I'm just going to bump it with the tip of my finger to get it going the right way. That looks better. We can live with that. If you don't have a nice grid like this, the instructions have an alternative, and you just kind of, it's got a seam in it, which is annoying, but you essentially, just plop it down here and make sure all of your fins and stuff line up pretty well. I'm not going to worry about that because I'm pleased with my alignment. All right, next phase then for the next video is we need to attach the motor mount and get it ready for finishing. Very exciting. I will see you then.